start off, we'd love to hear a bit about like how your project began. Like, what inspired you to create this project specifically for Petrosino Square, and how does the location influence the meaning of the work?
Great question. So, I have been the public artist in residence with the Department of Homeless Services and the Department of Cultural Affairs since 2022. And the idea behind this initiative is to embed artists in city agencies who are given access to be able to kind of mine and understand that agency and then come up with some kind of public facing artwork. So, all that being said, I was interested in specifically working with the Department of Homeless Services because I had taught art in city shelters for many years and had worked a lot with children experiencing homelessness. And I wanted to better understand what it means for New York City to be a right to shelter city. So, New York is the only city in the United States that guarantees a shelter bed to anyone who asks for it, regardless of immigration status. And therefore, we have a really large sheltered homeless population and a smaller street homeless population than comparable cities or other cities across the United States because of this legal promise that was fought for by advocates over many decades through advocacy and litigation. And I wanted to come up with a kind of project that would create a space for people experiencing homelessness to be able to address the greater New York City public and speak for themselves. There's a lot of stigma, there are a lot of stigmas and misperception that exist when it comes to homelessness and also with the right to shelter specifically. And that is what led me to wanting to think about what is a structure or a form for people living in city shelters to be able to have a format or a way of engaging um, that could lend itself to a public artwork ultimately. And I became really interested in logbooks, which, as you know, are the kind of basis of this project. I spent years leading log writing workshops and shelters across the five boroughs, inviting people navigating homelessness and frontline workers to write down what they think is most important. And then these logbook entries are printed on aluminum city street signs that are fabricated by the Department of Transportation. And then that all of these signs are what really create the basis of this iteration of this ultimately multi-borough project. And the first iteration of which is at Petrosino Square. And so you were asking, Kaylin, like what about Petrosino Square was maybe important to um, or why Petrosino Square and what's important about that site specifically for this work. Petrosino Square is located in Community District 2 in Manhattan, which is a community district that consists of Soho, NoHo, Nolita, Greenwich Village, parts of Chinatown. Um, and I think that's all of it. You can double check if I'm missing anywhere. But it's a large kind of consortium of different neighborhoods which do not have any shelters. So there's no shelters in all of Community District 2. That's very different than many other community districts across the city, which can have dozens of shelters. And that is that the fact that Community District 2 has very few shelters is really a reflection of the cost that it takes to actually buy property or live in those neighborhoods. It might not make financial sense for the city to have a purpose-built shelter in those neighborhoods because of the cost of real estate. But also there's a long and kind of concerted effort for people who want to protect their vested real estate interests to try and stop affordable supportive housing from being built in that community district and also um, uh, protest or try and stop a shelter from being built in that given neighborhood. So knowing that, it was really important for me to think about what signs were on view in Petrosino Square and how to create a kind of installation that invites people moving through that neighborhood into the discourse. So maybe people who are new to understanding the complexities of homelessness, and to kind of create multiple different kinds of entry points through the different log entries, so that uh, uh, people feel like engaging homelessness is part of their civic responsibility, part of something that they have to and should contend with.
Mhm. Yeah, like, linking back to, like, thinking about, like, how people encounter with your work, like, we're curious about, like, your perspective on, like, how Aspire, like, engage with the work. Like, from your perspective, like, how would you hope, like, people encounter or engage with the installation as, like, they move through the square in their, like, everyday routines?
It's, I think because it is a public park, it's a public park in a part of the city that doesn't have a lot of shared space. It's a part of the city that's very privatized, in terms of like there aren't a lot of parks even in which to spend time. So I knew that I needed to create an installation that was sensitive to that fact, that there aren't a lot of spaces in which people can really like be together in public space. So when I was thinking about how to curate and kind of decide what signs would go where, I didn't want to overrun the space with lots of different sculptures and log entries because I didn't want it to feel claustrophobic or a kind of uh, I didn't want to take away from that rare public space. I wanted to create an installation that meaningfully responded to the site. So that involved creating these different sculptural forms that where the bases themselves have seating so that there's an invitation for people to be able to sit or lie out. When the work first was installed, it was warmer out, so there was a lot more bodies in the space, a lot more people kind of sitting and using those bases, which was really a delight to see. And I hope that continues as it gets warmer, in the spring and into the summer. I also wanted to think about how to respond to the hostile architecture that is inherent to the park. So in addition to kind of having these bases that double as seating, there are footrests that are scattered throughout the park that are placed right in front of benches so that as people are sitting, even though there are these barricades that might bifurcate the bench or prevent kind of public splaying out or rest, one could still rest by putting their feet up. So it was really important to me that whether or not someone was contending with and kind of reading the material of the installation or just kind of sitting in the park, there were different ways in which to engage the work in a more direct way and perhaps even in a more passive way, like asserting the right to rest in public space.
Mm, yeah, like, as you mentioned, like, public space, like, the art in public space, like, plays, like, an important role in your work, and, like, for you, like, what role do you think, like, public art plays in, like, shaping how people understand or navigate, like, small urban spaces like this one?
I think there's a long history of public art existing in as like what might be derogatorily referred to as like plop art, like where there's a big abstract sculpture and it just gets kind of placed, in the middle of a neighborhood, that where there isn't necessarily even like a formal relationship between what's on view and the site in which the work is being shown. I'm really interested in how public art is site responsive. So, how, as artists, we're not only working within, white walled spaces, museums, galleries, kind of traditional sites, but how, as artists, we can um, assert that access to art is a kind of public good, but also think about what it means to place works in specific contexts that have impact, that where there's a lot of intentionality that goes into why a work is cited in a very particular place. And so This project has two components to it formally. One are these large scale installations that will exist in parks and plazas as the work travels borough by borough over the next year, year and a half. The other are these small signs that exist, one per every community district throughout the borough in which the work is being shown. And they both have very different kinds, they both ask for very different kinds of engagement on the part of the viewer. One in the Petrosino Square, which we're mostly talking about, that is really about kind of long form engagement, sitting with and contending with lots of different kinds of perspectives in relationship to one another. The smaller signs, in some ways, more invite a kind of uh, or they really kind of they invite a choreography that is contingent upon the power that is imbued in official signage. So as we're moving through the city, we're surrounded by city street signs that have different kinds of legal implications even within them. Like if your car is parked in front of a no parking sign, it could get towed. These signs have this kind of authority embedded within them. And I was interested in how to subvert or reroute that authority by having these individual signs, which are made by the same printmakers that make those kind of no parking signs, but really with handwriting. So in this very kind of human way, center different sentiments that have been expressed by New Yorkers experiencing homelessness and shelter staff. So that strain of the installation is really about inviting people to kind of stop and engage as they're moving through the city. Whereas the larger installations are more about creating a kind of complex site where discourse and different engagement can emerge through, individual spectators, but also through public programming. Like we just had a big public program in the context of the space with writer Jennifer Egan and advocate Will Watts from Coalition for the Homeless, where that installation then transforms into a site for public discourse and program.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like I really like how you describe the connection between like art and like public spaces because that is something we also notice a lot during our like field observations. And when we go there when it's warmer, there are like more people that are like willing to like sit on the benches and like without like them knowing they're interacting with our work, they already interacted with it like as they're like doing their own businesses. I will notice like they will like occasionally glance at the site and glance at the signs and read them and like even taking pictures. And I feel like that is like a really good way for people to like interact with your like installations. And for our final question, like what challenges or considerations did you face when creating an artwork that would be placed outdoors and interacted within such a like a open and everyday environment?
Great question. There were lots of different kinds of challenges and considerations to think through with creating work for public space. One is that you just don't know how people are going to um, respond to these artworks that are large, flat, and could be interpreted as canvases onto which to write or put stickers. So, something we were really kind of wary of or concerned about was whether or not these signs would start to get lots of different markings on them, stickers, etc. I think something, and so there are a few different ways to address that. One is that the Department of Transportation has a kind of coating that can go on the top of the sign so that if a sticker does go on top, you can kind of carefully or easily take it off. Something though that I will say, like that has amazed me, is so far that has not happened. So far, there has been a real, I think, like reverence for the works themselves. They have not been written on or drawn on or graffitied on. There haven't been stickers placed. I think that speaks to the fact that um, people are engaging with what's written or what's there and
Mhm,
are allowing for it to live and recognizing that it could and should be in public space. I think
mhm,
there's a such a a respect that has emerged for these pieces as artworks, but I think also based on the content that they are encompassing. So we spent a lot of time planning for and imagining what's going to happen when these pieces get written on. And so far, I mean, I don't want to, they're going to be on view for quite a while longer, but so far that hasn't happened. Um, another kind of challenge to think through was that the Parks Department in Petrosino Square does not allow you to secure directly into the ground, like directly into the footers, like the footing of the park. So instead, I had to come up with a freestanding base. And that freestanding base for each sculpture had to be a minimum of 800 pounds, which is very heavy for and knowing especially that these are works that are supposed to travel across the city. So that constraint ended up leading to really kind of creative experimentation. I worked with a trained architect named Ekin Bilal to kind of think through how to fulfill that 800-pound criteria, but also not lose the movability that was needed, both conceptually and materially, to the work itself. So we came up with these conventions of blocks that can be reassembled in all different kinds of forms that can also hinge together to create and fulfill that 800-pound criteria. So that was another kind of challenge to think through how to create a work where the bases were large but also intentional, and didn't detract from the work but added to the ideas.
Mhm. Great. That was wonderful. Like, thank you so much, Alex, for answering all of our questions. Your insight are like incredibly helpful for our project. And it's been like so nice to hear directly from you about like how public address came together.
Of course,
And yeah, and yeah, before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to add?
I'll share a few things with you that I didn't share yet because I haven't talked with you about how I've witnessed public engagement with the work. Like what are some of the observations I've either seen or learned about?
Mhm,
One moment that was really exciting was I took a group of residents at the Third Street Men's Shelter with Project Renewal, which is a shelter on the Lower East Side, to come for a walkthrough of the installation. And they they were so enthused about this work. I'm actually going there tomorrow to hold a log writing workshop. One of the responses from one of the people on this tour or this walkthrough was, there should be one of these signs on every street corner throughout all of New York City. So that was like just the best thing to hear after working on this. Another really kind of incredible story was that someone who works for the Department of Homeless Services on election day was walking to go vote, and she came across one of the small signs near Gramercy Park, and she stopped to read it because she had been hearing about this project for so long and was excited to actually see one in the flesh. And someone else came over and started reading the small sign as well. And the two of them got to talking and having this kind of deep conversation around homelessness and housing insecurity and policy. And the person who worked for the Department of Homeless Services, asked this person they met on the street, did you vote yet? And the person said they weren't planning to vote. And the person from the Department of Homeless Services told them like why it's important to vote if you care about these issues. And in the end, the two of them walked together to the polling site and both of them voted. So literally this person voted by way of seeing this sign, having this conversation, who was not planning to vote. So that was a really incredible moment that
mhm,
emerged. And something, you're also asking me about like the formal qualities of the work. That kind of conversation could only happen because it's a small sign. It's a small sign on a lamppost, so two people have to physically be kind of close together to be reading it at the same time. And that elicited that kind of intimate dialogue that led to someone ultimately voting, an otherwise
mhm.
disenchanted voter. But there's more I could share, but those are maybe two other kind of good anecdotes as you're thinking about public space and how people engage with a work like this.